Hello and welcome to this video. My new single Terminal Horizon is out and I thought it would be a great idea to show you guys the project a little bit. And you can listen to the song on every major streaming and download platform. There's also a link in the video description down below. And at first let's have a look at the structure of this whole project. Here are my structure tracks, and this is just for the songwriting purpose. So when I do my songwriting, I have a lot more stuff going on, and some stuff is ready, some stuff is empty, and when I finish the songwriting, then I delete all the stuff I don't need. So here is my signature track, here is the tempo track, the marker, and here is just a simple MIDI track. And I use that for, let's call it a structure track. So I can create these blocks and I can name these. And I also create these markers here so I can switch around between these song sections. Here are my strings. And the yellow stuff here is the brass section. The blue tracks are the percussions. All the green tracks are the drums. And then we have one bass guitar here, just one mono track. We have the rhythm guitars, simple double tracking. We have one lead guitar here. And also a choir is going on, a man choir. And this dark purple stuff are all the additional hits. It's, let's say it's some sort of trailer and hybrid style hits. This light purple stuff here are all the synths. And here we have some additional sound effects. That's it for the whole structure. These are some automation lines here. And let's have a look at the mixers. Currently in Cubase I have two mixers going on. This one is for all my group and effect tracks. So of course the strings are going into a string bus. Here is my drum bus, and here are all the synths. Here is my MixBus. There is some stuff going on, and I talk about that later. And on the stereo out, I just have a limiter, flatline 2 in the limit mode, just for the loudness. And here are all my effect tracks for the send effects. And that's it for this mixer. And the other mixer are all my individual tracks, so I can sweep around and tweak all the single instruments. Here are also the group tracks. And my group tracks are always red. And my effect tracks are always purple. Or let's say pink or purple. And yeah, but it doesn't matter. It's different for everyone. So, and let's start to have a look at all the instruments. And I think it's a good idea to divide that into the sections here. So we have an intro section, which sounds like this. And that's it for the intro. And as you can see, we have some percussions here. We have no drums here. The drums are coming in on the second section here. And we have just one lead guitar. And of course we have some hits and some synthesizers. And let's have a look at the hits and the synths at first. So let's make this a little bit bigger. So here we have some boom hits. Let's put this in solo. Just a simple boom hit, nothing really special. And I always have my SSL channel here. I love this plugin so much. I tweak almost everything with this one. And Here is the boom hit without the SSL channel. And here with. It's not a super big difference, I just tamed the low end a little bit. I added some of 450, just some low mids, and I did a low cut at around, 90 Hertz. But I don't really care about the numbers. I just turn the knobs and listen to the sound, because these numbers are also a little bit off. So it's not really specifically at 90 Hertz. I just turn the knobs and listen. And the reason for that is the boom sounds and all the other hybrid hits, they sound amazing. They sound really big and powerful, but most of the time it's too much for a full mix, especially when you layer these together. And when the metal section, with metal section I mean the metal drums, the bass guitar and the electric guitars, when the whole metal section is coming in, then the impact has to be big and powerful. But when all the synths and the hybrid hits are too big on the intro section, the impact is gone. You don't have this built up. So I just tame all the synth and the hit stuff just a little bit, of course not too much, so we would lose all the impact. So again, with and without the plugin. And let me show you this with the synth section. Sounds like this. And the first one is a trailer-like piano. And as you can hear, there are some artifacts going on in the background. And the reason for that is, I think, because I boosted a lot of the high end and the high mids. So here is without the SSL channel. And it sounds amazing alone. But for the whole mix, I just want that pingy piano sound. I don't want all that low end and the boxy low mids, so I tweaked it a lot. Maybe I overdid it a little bit, but it's okay for now. So here is with the SSL channel. And with the full mix. So you can hear the piano cuts through the mix really nice, and we really don't need all this low mids and this low end from this single track alone. Again, it sounds amazing alone, but for the full mix we also have this pad going on, we have these hybrid hits going on. So for the piano is always difficult, and you have to keep in mind the piano alone, it always sounds amazing with a lot of low mids and a lot of low end, especially the low notes on the piano. But for the whole mix, you have to tame the piano tracks almost always, to be honest. And don't care how they sound alone. It's important how they sound in the mix. Again, listen to the piano with the full mix. And this fab filter EQ, this is just for some, it's almost like a tilt EQ. Because we have some notes that are sticking out a little bit too much. And yeah, it's not that special. Let's move on to this pad here. I think it's from Keep Forest Devastator, if I remember correctly. And let's have a listen in solo. and sounds great. I really like it. And here the same thing, I just have the SSL channel here, and here is without the SSL channel. And here is the same thing. Maybe you think, but it sounds better without the SSL channel. And the thing is, I agree, but it sounds better alone. But for the whole intro section, there is a lot of other stuff going on. So I tamed the low end a lot here. So have a listen. And for this intro section, we could open up the low end a little bit, but we have to be careful because on the second section, the bass guitar and the metal drums are coming in. So if that one would be too big, then the impact is gone when the metal section is coming in. So I just tamed the low end here, and I raised some of the high and low mids here. And for the synth stuff, as I said before, there is a lot of sound across the whole frequency range, and I just searched for the sounds I like and then I boosted them. Like this one, because these are great sounds, these gritty and raspy sounds. These cut through the mix very nicely. So here is without the boost on the low and high mids. And again with. And in my opinion, we still have enough low end for this intro section. But now we have also a lot of gritty and raspy sounds which are cutting through the mix very nicely. And I like to do that on almost every electronic stuff. Of course, don't overdo this. When you boost all these high mids here, it can be a little bit piercing to the ear. And I do that with a very broad Q filter here. Just for the electronic sounds. With the metal stuff, I would back it off a little bit like this or this. But for all the electronic stuff, I use very broad Q filters. It depends, of course. And again, here is with and without the SSL channel. And in the full mix. Okay, let's move on to these lead tracks here. These are some lead sounds from a synthesizer. Sounds like this. And let's deactivate all the plugins and also the send, and now it sounds like this. And of course, I like the main sound, but you can clearly hear we have a lot of low mids that are masking all over the frequencies. So I tweaked it a lot. The first thing I did is to reduce some low end and low mids here, very broad. And the next thing is a saturation knob from Softtube, just for some basic saturation. And again, the SSL channel. And here the same thing, very broad Q filters, and I just search for the sounds I like. And again, a very drastic low cut, because I don't want that low end from this sound. For the low end in the intro, we have our pad sound right here. So you have to decide, or let's say I always do that, you have to decide where is your main source for your low end. It can be a pad sound, it can be some hybrid hits, it can be a bass guitar, it can be some other synthesizer stuff, a sine wave, some very low strings, whatever. But in my opinion, you have to decide where is the main source of the big and powerful and tight low end. And then everything else you have to tame a little bit. Of course, not completely like this one. This is a drastic example, of course. But you have to decide, in my opinion, where is the main source of the low end, and the other stuff, just tame it a little bit. So you have a really clear and tight mix. And the last thing here is a black hole Synth. Let's activate it. And in case if you wonder, my black hole Synth is right here. I think it's just the default setting. And of course, because it's a Synth effect, I have the mix at 100, of course. And everything else, I think, is the default setting. And I just have an EQ afterward. So, because I don't need the low end reverb and also the super high end. And I think we can also do this here with the low and high knobs, but I like to do that with the fab filter one. I always do that with my reverb sense. So again, let's turn this off. And again, I boosted some of around 2.5K, here at around 7K, here a little bit more drastically, here around 3 dB, and here a lot of the high end at around 8K with a high shelf. And here I reduced some of the very boxy low mids. It sounds really warm alone, but in the full mix it's way too much. So I used the bell setting here and reduced some of these low mids. And that's it for this sound. And we also have, this is a modal sound. And let's deactivate all the effects. And here almost the same thing. I shift the sound from the low end, low mid, up to the more to the higher mid frequencies. Because I have my main source for the low end and for the low mids. And all the other stuff, especially these, let's call it more sound effects, for these ones, I want more high mids and more gritty and raspy sounds. So the first thing is a very broad EQ with the fab filter, and the next one again is the SSL channel. And here the same thing as before. I boosted a lot of the high end, a lot of the high mids, and here a lot of 2.5K. Again, of course, it sounds nice alone, but with the full mix, the full mix, it's completely gone, but these frequencies where all the sound is I like from this sound source, they are cutting very nicely through the mix. So, and that's it for the synth section, I think. Here we have the booms. Here we have just one lead guitar in the second intro section. And as you can see, it is just one DI track. I used archetype Plini for this one. And this is one of my favorites. Whenever it comes to a lead guitar sound, I just pull this up. Of course, I have many other ones, but this is it's just amazing, especially for lead guitar sounds. Let's turn all the other stuff off here. Also the black hole synth. Now it sounds like this. And to be honest, in the songwriting process, I just played this in. I didn't care about how old my strings were or the battery of the active pickups. I just grabbed the guitar and played this in. And as you can hear, it sounds not that great without all the effects. And this is pretty much the default setting. I didn't have the drive activated, and I used the default caps here. I used the default reverb and the delay. And then I have a FabFilter EQ, just some minor tweaks here. A saturation knob from Softtube, again, basic saturation, not really needed, but it adds a little bit more thickness to the lead sound. And again, the SSL channel. And here the same thing, just to carve out some of the low end. We don't really need that on a lead guitar. And here, for every kind of guitar sound, I always search for the mid frequencies. And here I have it around 2.5K. And here, what is it? Around 1K. Just some boosts, the sound I like. And for the lead guitar sound, the black hole send is really important. I don't use the black hole always for lead guitar sound. It depends on the song. With a more traditional metal song, I wouldn't use the black hole. Then maybe it's a little bit too much. But for this more atmospheric and hybrid song, I use the black hole. And as you can hear, with this just one DI track with the black hole send, the lead guitar, this one track, it gets a lot more space and stereo with the black hole set. And in the full mix, and on the second section of the intro, let's talk about this bass pulse here. It sounds like this. And here is without all the effects. It sounds pretty tight already, but as always, I tweaked it. So here we have Dewey from Heaviosity. This is a saturation distortion plugin with a lot of options. So whenever you can add some overdrive or even distortion to your sound, just do it, because then you have a lot more harmonics and it cuts nicely to the mix. So you can hear we have a lot more grittiness and raspiness of the sound. Overdrive and distortion are always great ways to enhance your synthesizer sounds. The next thing is a fab filter EQ, just one minor tweak here. And the last one, of course, is the SSL channel. And here the same thing as before, I boosted just the stuff I like. And the same thing, I have a low cut and I left some of the low end in because this is the intro section. There is no bass guitar, no drums, so we have a little bit more space for the overall low end. And here again I boosted some of the high mids. Just with these boosts here, you can raise all of the grittiness and raspiness of the synthesizer sounds, and at the same time it tightens up your sound a little bit. So you can see when I put this knob to 0, it gets a little bit more boomy and low end heavy. So this is for me always a great way to search for the sounds you like and then boost them a little bit. And then at the same time, you don't have to cut everything else, just some low end, of course. And yeah, that's for the bass pulse. And we also have some percussions here. Just some basic clicks here, nothing special. And here we have some toms. So without the effects. And they sound really boomy and really low mid heavy. But the thing is, right out of the box from the library, they have to sound like this. Because when you buy this library and you open up the sounds, you don't want a really thin sound, you want them to sound big and heavy. But again, for a full mix, it's way too much, so I tightened these up. The first thing is a fab filter EQ, just to turn down some of the low end and low mids here. And the next one is saturation. Then I have the capitator. So I really like this tone knob here, and just a little bit of drive from the E setting. And this tone knob, you can shift the sound from dark to bright. And here is the same thing as always. These toms in solo, maybe they sound better when they have a more darker sound, but for the full mix context, we need a more focused and higher sound. It's a little bit too much. Let's leave it like that. And again, the SSL channel, the same thing as before, boosted just the stuff I like. With toms and percussions, almost always it's a nice idea to boost some of the high end at around 8K and around 6K. Even when you reset this whole thing and you just boost this 8K here. It sounds so much more focused for the overall mix. So let's go back to the original setting. And here the same thing for the low end, we don't really need it. And don't be afraid to make bold moves here. Just don't care about the numbers, turn the knobs or turn the EQ curves, and then listen to the sound, what you need, what you don't need, or what you like and don't like. And again in the full mix. So, and that's it for the intro section. Let's move on to the more interesting section with all the drums and the guitars, the bass guitar. I think let's start with the drums. Let's solo them, and they sound like this. And for the snare, as you can hear, I have a lot of reverb here. I wouldn't do that in a normal or standard metal song, but for this more atmospheric hybrid one, I just don't care. Because in the full mix, it sounds great in my opinion. Let's start with the drum group, and I just have a fab filter cue, nothing going on. Okay, so we can ditch this one. And here I have my favorite compressor for a drum bass. This is the BSC2 from Brainworks, the Vertigo. And I used a pretty basic bass setting, a pretty fast release, 0.3 seconds. Most of the time I use the fastest release. I think that was a mistake, not really sure. And slow attack, ratio 2:1 and just a few dB of gain reduction, and sidechain with 60 Hz. And it just reacts to the snare sound. And that's it for the drum group. And for the individual drum tracks, I have a lot more going on, so let's go to all of these very quick. So for the kick drum, again, the SSL channel. I boosted some of the high end and the high mids at around 3K, also around 1K, and a little boost at around 50 to give the kick drum a little bit more thump, because we boosted a lot of the high and high mids. Let's switch back to all of the drums. And I think we can add a little bit more. And as you can hear, there is a little double kick section going on. And for the click sound of the kick drum, I don't really like a super high clicky sound. That is more the purpose for, let's say, technical death metal. But this is clearly not technical death metal. So I'm a little bit more moderate with the high click sound. So I just use a little bit of 8K. At the same time, I did a high cut at 8K. So I can compensate the high-end boost a little bit. And I always like a boost at around 1K, 2K, up to 3K. So you have a little bit of the high mid punch of the kick drum. Let's search for the double kick section. I think it's right here. So without the high end. Of course, you can feel the double kick, let's say, but you don't really hear it. But with the high and high mid boosts, and of course, this high-end area, it sounds a little bit more, let's say, modern. And this area between 1.5 and 3K, it can be sound a little bit flappy, let's say. But I really like this sound to give the kick drum a little bit more thump. And just some minor compression with the channel itself here, just a ratio 3:1. I always leave this at 3 or 4:1, it depends of course, and just some minor compression, but always after the EQ section. So that's it for the kick drum, and I really ditched the kick sub track here, and for the snare top, sound like this. Again, the SSL channel, some high end, some high mids, and that's it. And I have an additional reverb here, the Valhalla Room, pretty big one, 1.2. But this is just for this song because it's more atmospheric and hybrid. I wouldn't do that in a standard metal song. But in the whole mix, and for the snare bottom, I also have the Valhalla here. And the toms, I also have some high end and high mid boosts, also around 1.5K. I'm not really sure. There are some toms. Let's hear these. Where is the tom section? Now I remember, because this section is a little bit different. It's not a standard tom fill where the drummer plays, let's say, 16 notes over all the toms. Then I would treat the toms a little bit differently. And here I just boosted some of the high end and also some of the low mids here, which I normally wouldn't do. But for this, it's a completely other sound, let's say, sound area with all these synthesizers and this tons of reverb. So there can be a sound a little bit different for this one. And here's the other one. And let's move on to the overheads. And of course I boosted a lot of the high end with a high shelf. And I also brought back some of the low mids, and here also at around 1.5K. And of course it sounds a little bit boxy, but I like to give the cymbals also a little bit of mid-range. So you don't have just that sizzling high end, you also have a little bit of body of the cymbals. And of course a very drastic low cut here. So, and the room track. We have to activate the snare because the room track is gated here. So I triggered the room track with this gate with the snare top track, and I plan to do an extra video of this topic. So I go to this really quick. I have a sidechain activated with the snare top track, and whenever the snare hits, the gate opens and, let's say, let the room track come through. So without the gate, we have all the other stuff from the room track, all the simple washiness. But with the gate, we just have the snare and the room sound. And again, I do another video about this whole topic. And before the gate, I treated the room sound like this. I boosted a lot of the high end, a lot of the high mids, also a drastic high and low cut to shift the frequency range from the super high end back to the high mids. And the purpose for this one is I really want to emphasize the snare and the room sound. Let's deactivate the gate. Now without the gate it sounds like this, and now without the SSL channel. Let's deactivate the snare top track. So you can hear I ditched a lot of the low end in the room track. I really don't need this. And I waste a lot of the snare attack. But of course that causes problems. We also waste a lot of the high mids of the cymbals. But then with the gate, we just have the room track, let's say, open when the snare bottom track hits. Okay, and that's it for the drums, I think. Here we have the hi-hats, just some basic EQ for hi-hats. And that's it for the drums. And we have also some percussions going on here. This is just for the support for the drums. And here we have the bass guitar. And I processed the bass on the group track. I'm not really sure why I used a group track here, because it's just one track. Normally I wouldn't a group track with just one track. Doesn't make any sense. But it is what it is. So here I use the SSL channel again, but this is from Solid State Logic itself. And this is the channel strip 2. And for the bass, I boosted a lot of the high end, and here a lot of around 1K, because this is the area where the bass guitar cuts through the mix. And then to compensate the high-end boost and the low-mid boost, I added a lot of around 80 Hz for the low end of the bass. Also a little bit of compression here inside the channel. And the next thing is to carve out some of the, let's say, boxy low mids around 180. Then I have Low Control from Black Salt Audio. I absolutely love this plugin, just to give the bass a little bit more thump at around 80 Hz. And I compress the section below 90. So this plugin is absolutely great. You really can enhance your low end and keep the low end very flat and even, which is really important in my opinion. And the last thing is a limiter, just to really pin down the bass track. So when you have a look at the meter here, you can see the bass track is really pinned down. So it stays flat all around the track and it doesn't jump around. So that was the bass guitar. Let's move on to the rhythm guitars. They sound like this. Let's deactivate the lead guitar. And as you can hear, I don't cut all the ends exact at the grid, because for me that would sound unnatural. I don't care if there are any little noises or let's say a few tails after the right note, but I don't like to cut everything else right at the grid. It's just my personal taste. So for the guitars, I used the amp knob from Bogwin Digital, just the basic setting. We just have one knob here and the pedal is activated, of course. And for the second guitar, I used Archetype Nolly X. And also some pretty standard settings. I ditched a lot of the mids here. I activated the overdrive pedal with just some basic settings. And I used a limiter on each track just to tame some of the peaks. It's not really drastic as with the bass guitar, but here it's just to catch some of the super high peaks. And for the guitar group track, which is right here, at first let's hear it without the effects. Sounds a little bit boxy and muddy. So the first thing, as always, the SSL channel. So I boosted a lot of the mid-range. Whenever I have a guitar track, I just search for the mid-range. Where is the sweet spot? Where is the sound of the mid-range? Because that's what the guitar is for me, the overall mid-range. Of course, we all like super heavy and fat guitars, but the mid-range is so important. So I always search for the mid-range, something like this. So below 1K it get really boxy. And here it started to sound really great in my opinion. There's always a little sweet spot for the mid-range in my opinion. And then of course I boosted a little bit of the high end, also a low and high cut here, around 8K. Again, this is a little trick. With the SSL channel, you can high cut at 8K and at the same time you can raise the high shelf at 8K, so you can compensate the high cut and the high end boost. And just a little bit of, again, 1.5K. And to compensate all the high mid boosts here, I added some low end at around 110. And that's it for the channel. And then I have some additional EQs just to tame some of the notes that are sticking out with the palm mutes. And an additional EQ. And this one is just for the third section, I think. I have automated this. Let me show you this. It is right here on this section. So you can see before the section, this plugin is deactivated, and then when we enter this section, because then we have some standard and basic power chords strumming, and I just want to tame some of the high mids. Yeah, and the last thing is the overall Pro MB multi-band compressor, again just for the palm mute section. But on this example, to be honest, I do the palm mute taming more with the fab filter EQ, with the dynamic EQ, because the guitars are just playing the same note with the palm mutes, so I can use the dynamic one better for this. If the notes are switching around all over the place, then I would use the Pro MB more, because this one is more broad, and the dynamic EQ is more about specific notes that are sticking out. And yeah, that's it for the guitars. We have also some automation here. As I mentioned before, this one fab filter EQ is automated. Also the high pass frequency between the palm mute section and the power chord section, I also automated these, and a little bit of volume automation as well. And I think that's it for the guitars. What else do we have? Let's talk about the additional sound effects. Yes, let's switch to these ones here. They sound like this. And these are just some, let's call it stings. And let's deactivate the effects and the send, and completely raw, they sound like this. So super low and heavy, and as I mentioned before, we really don't need this super heavy low end. So the first thing is a pretty drastic and broad low cut, and then again, as always, the SSL channel. Again, I just search for the sounds I like within the sound source, and I boosted of the high mids, the low mids around 1.7K, and again an additional low cut. So without the SSL channel, it still sounds a little bit boxy and muddy, and with the channel, again, we shift the sound a little bit more from the low mids up to the high mids. And here also a black hole send to give the sound a more stereo vibe. So we have a nice stereo tail going on, and with the full mix. And as you can hear, these are just for the always for the one, just some additional sound hits. And it's really important that you carve out all this super heavy low end here, because otherwise it would totally clash with your bass guitar, with your guitars, with your metal drums. So we don't really need all this big heavy low end and these boxy low mids. So don't be afraid to make bold moves and shift the sound completely up to the high mids. And on this section, of course, we have some trailer hits going on. Let's solo these. And as you can hear, these are trailer and hybrid hits, and normally they would sound really massive, sub-heavy and low-end heavy. But again, this is a section where all this metal stuff is going on. The metal drums, the bass guitar. So I really tamed all these hits. And as you can see here with the fab filter, this is just for this one. And with these booms, again, the SSL channel, a big low cut here. And also, let's solo this one. Where is it? So when I deactivate the plugin, we have all this big and subby low end, but again, this is the metal section. We don't need that subby low end. So I tamed it a little bit, and I also raised some of the high mid sound. This is just for the tail sound, so let's have a listen to the tail. So you can emphasize the tail a little bit if you like the sound of the tail. And I think I did the same for this hit here. Let's solo this one. Again, a pretty drastic low cut. And here I really like the tail, this high mid sound. So I emphasize that a lot here. Of course, don't overdo it. In the full mix. So this nice tail really cuts through this metal mix. And I also reduced some of the boxy low mids here with the bell setting. And the last one, this one is a little bit special because I ditched almost all the low end and I just wanted these, let's say, this room verby sound. So I ditched all the low end and raised some of the high mids here, so without. And I just wanted this nice tail. Here is with the channel. And again with the full mix. And I want to mention, sometimes it can be a good idea to have some of the sub low ends from the hits, but you have to be careful with this. When you have a whole metal section going on and these hits are slamming in between with all this big heavy low end, it really can mess up your whole mix, to be honest. So normally I would automate this a little bit more, but for this one, on the intro section, I would leave a little bit of the low end intact, let's say. I just have these booms, and then with the dense metal section, I have a lot more hits, but this is more for the additional sound shaping and the sounds on top. And as you saw, I ditched a lot of the low end from the hits. And what else do we have? These lead plugs. Let's have a listen with the full mix. And let's deactivate all the effects and the synth. And here the same thing, it sounds amazing alone, but a lot of low end, a lot of low mids, and in this dense section here, I ditched almost all the low end. Here is the first cut. Then again I have Fury. Here is without. It is already distorted, but I wanted more. I absolutely love this plugin. And the last thing, again, the SSL channel. And here I ditched almost all the low end and I raised some of the high mids I really like. And normally how I do this is I set it, let's say, to 3 dB, and then I search for the frequency I really like of the sound. It's around here, and again always with the full mix. And I also have a send verb here. This one is, I call it the long verb. I always have a short, a mid, a long verb, and then the black hole one. The long verb is the seventh heaven. I use the West Church, and I control the levels with this fader here, and also here with the send level itself from the channel. And with the reverb it sounds like this. So we have a nice long tail, and because this is more a sound effect, and I always control the tail with the send verbs here. So in this dense section where is a lot of stuff going on, you have a nice fade out with these sound effects. Okay, let's move on to the next section. It is this one, and I don't want to talk about this one that much because all the instruments are still there, and we've talked about almost about all the ones. And again, here I use the automation with the guitars. I changed the high pass frequency, so when we enter this section, this low cut here is automated, so let's have a look. I mean, it's just a tiny jump. To be honest, it doesn't really matter. I think originally it was more drastic and I changed it up a little bit. And the automation is the bypass of the EQ. I talked about that already. So then let's move on to the last section. It's number 5 here. Sounds like this. And let's talk about just these instruments that are new, because as you can see in the other sections, these are not present, just right at the end. So here we have these strings and the brass section. Let's start with these strings. They sound like this. And again, let's deactivate all the effects. Not a super big difference, just some sound shaping, a big low cut. I don't need this low end. And for the strings, even these are really high strings, there is sometimes some low end rumble going on. And here again a drastic low cut, and I boosted a few of the high mids here at around 2.5K and a little bit of the high end. So you really can emphasize the string attack of the strings. And also a little bit of compression to keep these strings in place. And that's it. And it was easy for these strings because these are just higher strings. When I have a cello or contrabass or something else, then I would do a little bit more with this plugin. But these are just the high strings. They are really sitting on top of the mix. And let's talk about the brass section. At first we have the contra trombones. Again, without the effects. And here again, maybe they sound better without the processing, but they sound better alone. In the full mix, we don't need a lot of this boxiness, the low mids. I absolutely love these low contrabones for Heaviosity's Forzo library. And I love the full sounding, but with all this other stuff going on, we don't really need that for the full mix. I wouldn't do these drastic moves when they would play alone. Then I would leave the sound like it is, maybe some minor tweaks or something. So the first one is, okay, nothing. Can ditch that one. We have a little bit of saturation. And again, the SSL channel. And here, this drastic low cut. And here I really want to emphasize the raspiness and the grittiness from the trombones. So just set the knobs at a pretty decent boost and then search for the frequencies you like. In this particular case, it's all the high mid area. So even with all this other stuff going on, you can hear the trombones with the grittiness and the raspiness. I really like that. And let's move on to the tenor trombones and the horns, the French horns. They sound like this. And in the full mix. And here the same thing I mentioned before. Let's start with the tenor bones alone and without the effects. Great already. Just the SSL channel, and again I want to emphasize the bite of the trombones. So without the channel you hear a lot of low mids, not that much to be honest, but there are some low mids going on and we don't really need those. And here with these trombones I really want to emphasize the high mid bite and the high end. And the same for the horns. Maybe they sound a little bit hollow alone, so here's without the channel. And of course, again alone they sound better, but all these low mids, and this is always, let's say, it's always a little decision problem for me, because I really like these low mids of the French horns, because they sound really warm. But with the full mix, we don't really need those low mids. We need the high mids and the high end. So I really boosted the high end here and all these high mids around 7K. And sometimes I bring back some of the low mids with this bell knob here. So you can hear now they sound more warm. But again, with the full mix, I don't really need that. If these horns are playing alone in another section of the songs, I wouldn't do that drastically. But again, with this whole stuff, this is the climax part, where there's a lot of stuff going on. And for this one, I just really want the high mids and the bite of the bones and the horns. And I also did some automation with these strings, because some notes are a little bit jumpy and they are jumping out a little bit. So I tamed that with automation here. And I think that's it. Let's have a look at the group tracks. And I talked about the bass guitar already, the guitar track. And for the brass and string section, you can see for the strings, I didn't do anything on the string bus except for a little bit of reverb, the Sanders Hall from Seventh Heaven. And the brass section, the point is, nowadays I don't start with my group tracks. I used to do all the stuff, not all the stuff, but some of the stuff on my group tracks first, and then I moved to the single instruments. And nowadays, to be honest, I just want to take care of the instruments itself first. And then, of course, when I did all these crazy high mid boosts and low cuts, maybe there are some mid frequencies that are overlapping too much, and it can get a little bit overwhelming with the mid frequency. And then I would go to my group track, in this case the brass track, and then I would do some additional tweaking. And I also boosted some of the high mids here around 6K. So as you can hear, really drastic moves. It's not super necessary, to be honest, but I just wanted to focus this brass sound really on top of the mix for all the bite and the high end. So again, with the full mix. Yeah, so that's it for all the instruments. I think I covered almost all of these. And let's talk about my MixBus a little bit. And to be honest, this is not real mastering. This is just, let's call it a fake master. And the first one is an EQ, just to cut some of the subby low end here, and then some very broad minor tweaks. Again, as I said before, there are a lot of overlappings in the mid-range with the brass, the strings, the guitars, and I just carve out some of the mids here and boosted a little bit of the high end, around 12K. And then my favorite bus compressor, the SSL, and this is my basic setting, a ratio 2:1, slowest attack, fastest release, and sidechain around 80 Hz. Normally I set it to 60 Hz. In this case I set it to 80. And then I have a Pro MB multiband compressor, just to leave the super low end and the low mids, to really keep that area in place so it doesn't jump around. Let's say there are some notes with the bass or all these hybrid hits, maybe some of them can jump around a little bit, and with this one you can keep this low end and the low mids really under control. And then I have Ozone 10, and this is just the stabilizer, and the impact, just some minor tweaks here, and the imager here for this low end area, because I really want the super low end just in mono, so it's focused in the middle. Again, I just want to keep the super low end in mono, so I turned down a lot of the stereo width, because some of the hybrid hits, there is some low end going on in the sides, and I just want to tame this a little bit. And let me also show you this stabilizer here. And this is, let's call it a real-time stabilizer, and I just use it a little bit at around 30%. And this is more like a control tool for me when I'm finished with the mix, and then I put this on and I can see, okay, the mix is pretty balanced or not, or did I miss something? But don't take this too seriously. I just use it a little bit and I don't tweak this around a lot. And you can change some things here, and I use it in the rock mode, and nothing super special, to be honest. And that's it for the whole MixBus, and again flatlined on my stereo out. Just for the loudness, a ceiling minus 0.5. You can also use minus 0.3, minus 0.2. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, for this purpose. And yeah, I think that's it. If you have any questions, leave it down in the comments, and I hope you like this I hope you like this song and you like this little walkthrough, and please let me know in the comments what you think about it. And if you like it, please subscribe to my channel and give the video a thumbs up. And thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next one. Bye.